It's shop time. We're going to be doing the brushless upgrade for the 4200 XL here. And this is a pretty intensive project. So let's get started. I'll pull the plate off, get access to the inside of the unit. I added this connector right here so that I could take this thing off. Seems like I'm working on it all the time, so thought I'd get it to where I get that plate completely out of the way. Otherwise, it's just held on with those little wires. And I'll take our slew motor and disconnect it and get it out of there. And that is a different pinion gear that I put on that motor as well. It's got an extra tooth from the stock one. Takes some of the slop out, and it fit really nice. Then we'll take a pin out, get our tracks disconnected, get our tracks off of here, and we'll do that to both sides. Expose all of our wiring, so we need to take this plate off as well. That'll get us to our connector that's hidden underneath there. That's what allows us to be able to slew 360 plus degrees and still have connection to our motors so that our motors will still drive no matter what position our deck is in. And that keeps that power to those wheels. Now this, as you notice, is a brushed system that is stock on this unit. And so we're going to be replacing the motors as well as we have to replace that. Now this is all investigative too. I haven't had this thing apart. So I'm kind of just doing a step-by-step so I can do all the investigating and find out what I got to take apart and just show you guys the highlights. So I started taking one screw off on the interior, holding that electrical connection. Then I pulled the 6 screws out of the deck plate, and it's still held on there, so I know I got some more holding it on. So we got to find the rest of the fasteners that are holding this thing on. And one of them was a little bit unexpected up in the upper deck. But I moved on to just want to get these motors out of here, get some of the wiring out. And so you take the big screws out, but there's 3 more little screws right there that you got to take out of the OEM motors, the brushed ones. And that'll get those loose. And now the motor's free, just the wires holding it in place now. So what I'll wind up doing is just chopping those wires off. I don't plan on reusing it, but if I do, I'll just run some new wire for it. Because my hopes is, as you can see, this was my good motor, and it's still not so good. Got a lot of slop in it. It's loose. And I've had nothing but problems with these motors from the time it was brand new. I didn't have it out working it more than a day, and I was breaking things in those motors, whether it be the shear pin that was down in there. They're just constant issues. And it was slower than molasses on an ice cold day. So I needed the upgrade. I was trying some different motors, different setups to try and get a little bit more speed out of it. A few other gear reduction motors I've tried that were similar size to the stock ones, with some minor improvement, but still unsatisfactory. So I went ahead and splurged and got the brushless upgrade. I was expecting this to be more of a bolt-on upgrade. It is not, as you'll see further in the video. So now we got that deck plate off. We still got to get our electrical connector out. So that screw I was just pointing at there, we have to take that out. And that's just going all the way through that plate, which is holding that connector. And that's a little distribution for the hydraulic oil for the arms. So we got to get that upper screw and that other lower screw out. So there's 3 screws total that were holding this original electrical connector on here. And we got to do is just take those 2 wires loose out of that block, and we'll be freed up, and it's out of there. And so then we just have that loose ring up on top, kind of a spacer ring on top of the gear. And there it is. That's it. That's the old one for the brushed motors, and we'll no longer be using it. And here's where things started getting complicated, because now here's the new one, and that's what we got to get installed on there. Checking the fit with the gear rings, and it is spaced, so there's only one way that this will go in to the machine, and it fits very snugly. So the tolerances are excellent on this. There's no slop. It is a nice tight fit. I was real happy with what I found here. So once we get that put in place, then you'll get to see our next problem. And I'll show you right here. So this is where the wires rotate, is right at the bottom end where they're coming out. I'll show you that right here. So see, they just sit there and spin. That's our connection. And so we got 6 wires. We can't have any of them shorting. So all that connection's made up in there. But this is what allows us to be able to rotate without shorting anything. But however, you see there's 4 holes now in this new connector, and look at the size of the hole that's got to go through too, and there's only 3 holes that we're holding on the old one. Yeah, it's frustrating. So modification time. So there, I had to drill that out. I believe that was about 24 millimeters, and then I had to get my holes drilled for fastening this electrical connector to the plate. And I had to drill that hole big enough so that the wires would not be pinched or crimped in there. Now, due to the slew motor and mounting having to be in there, this hole right here, just like this one, is countersunk. I've got to countersink this one right here also, so that that screw will be flush and level or a little below the surface, so it doesn't get in the way of the mount for the slew motor. Get that in there, and that's a good fit. We're slightly below level, so that will work. And get that all secured in there. And I just did 3 screw holes because of where the other one wound up being located. I was just being lazy and didn't want to completely remove that block and try to countersink that other hole, because I'd had to move that whole arm off of there. And so 3 screws was holding the other one on, 3 screws is going to hold this one on. So I still went with the one that was through the block, and then the other 2 new ones that I drilled in there. So that'll give me plenty. That's not holding everything on. This is what's holding everything on. So you get those screws in there, and we had to take and make sure that that loose ring fit inside that cap ring. And then we'll get all those screws tightened up and on there, and then that will complete that part of the installation. And now for the actual brushless drive installation. So this is what comes with it, and I'll show you something here in just a minute that I found after I'd started getting this thing all mounted up here. The first thing you want to do is get your wires fed through the channel and make sure that they're not going to interfere with any of the moving parts. Make sure they're not going to get pinched. So we'll get those stuffed in there. This is always a fun process, especially when you got to do it twice because you figured something out. So it's like they won't go. That's a little channel that's in there. So you have to actually flip it over, get access, because they're just bumping up against there. And we'll get those pulled through and make sure they're underneath those guide wheels. And then it's ready to mount. Get that old junky motor out of the way. So I like these a lot better already, just because the way that they're designed looks a lot better so far. So even putting this thing together, I was already ecstatic about it, just hoping everything would work well. And so our two holes right there, the big ones, line up. Got the two holes on there, and as you look at the small holes, look at the orientation compared to the big holes. See, that one is offset compared to the other one. So I did get them on the wrong side. So I have to pull that one off, redo it, and get them on the right side. So now we're completely installed. Got the right motor on the right side, and now we can get our track plate back mounted to the deck. All right, now I'm putting my final screw in that electrical connector, and this is one I supplied. I just went with a little bit longer screw. Of course, this needing to have 4 screws anyway, I was going to have to supply a screw to get this in there. So there's the one through the distributor plate, the one that was countersunk, and this one here does not need to be countersunk, so I just went with the longer screw for it. And now that is fully attached with 3 screws, very secure. So now we got to get our motors connected to our electrical connections. So I did just pull just one plate off of there, and I didn't need to even do that. You can leave those on there. You just got to pull the pins on these idler wheels, and I did 2 to give me easier access. So I did that one, messed with it for just a second, and thought, nope, gonna have to pull that other one too. So pull that other pin out of there and get rid of that second idler, and that gives you plenty of room to work with. It's still kind of a tight fit, so the only way to get those connected for me was with pliers, because there's not a lot of excess wire, which you don't want a lot of excess wire. Once those were connected, it fits so well that I don't even have to worry about them getting in the way or getting tangled up with anything. They'll sit right in that channel. One word of caution with those idler wheels: be careful with those bearings. They just fall right out of there. I lost one for a few minutes after it rolled on the floor, and the one I didn't pull out of there went flying somewhere, but I found it. So I was able to get it back in there. And when putting them in, it's easy. Just sandwich it, and then you just start it in there, and they slide right in, no problem. There's not enough space for it to just fall out of there. And then you just slide your pin in and push your pin back into place, and simple enough. Now, even though there was a lot more involved in this upgrade than I was anticipating, it actually went really smooth. I really enjoyed working on it. It didn't even take as much time as I had anticipated, and all the little hiccups that I ran into, just was able to move past it and do the modifications. Because here's another one. There's our plate, and go to fit it on, and I knew this was going to happen just right away. And there, we're sitting right up against the wires, and you cannot press that against there. Those wires are bent as much as, yep, frustrating, as much as they're going to be. So I just bent the plate and got it to where it would clear that little wire harness, and that's all it needed. Now I'm not rubbing against there because they're not moving. That's stationary to where that plate is at, so we're not going to have any rubbing issues or anything. And so that should take care of it and be safe. And now we'll get our slew motor put back in place here. And again, that's that upgraded pinion. I say upgraded, it took a lot of the slop out of the deck movement when I added a pinion with an extra tooth, and it fit without binding, which was really nice. And one of the things I want to note too is that hole is critical that I drilled in there, as well as the placement of the 4 holes, because of the tight tolerance of that electrical system on the gear. Those have to fit just right. So now we get into the electrical part of this. We gotta ditch those brushed ESCs and get installed our brushless ESCs. So we're going to rework some of this electrical. A lot of these connectors we're not going to use anymore, but I do want to hold on to them, so I want to make sure those screws stay in place, because those are useful elsewhere down the road. And we're actually going to take 4 of those off. I'm just going to snip this guy right here, and we'll just use those 2 that are connected for the slew motor, and we'll disconnect the ESCs from that, and that goes in my spare parts bin, which is just a coffee can, if you didn't see it back there earlier. So we'll get these. Just an electrical mess. I could have taken things apart, straightened everything out, but I didn't, and you'll see I just kind of cram it back in place in there in a semi-organized fashion, which you can't see, doesn't bother you. So get rid of that one, and that was channel 10. The other one's on channel 9, and I just plugged them in and figured if I needed to swap them, I'd swap them, but I managed to actually get that one right. Had a 50-50 chance, and I won on that one. But we got to get this is the one that we will reuse. This is our electrical distribution block, and so our ESCs we will just tie right into here and wire it just like it was on the other one. And with just have to worry about your polarity, just your negative positive on there. Make sure that you get those right. And they didn't come with a whole lot of wire either, little stubby leads. So I just stripped those just a little bit, make sure I get good connection, and then we just wire those up again, just like the brushed ones were wired. Get all of our electrical connections made, give them a tug, make sure everything's tied down nice and tight, we got good connection, and then we can hook up our motors. But first, you notice there is switches on each of those ESCs, so I don't want those just dangling around, getting snagged up on stuff and not being able to locate them, not knowing which one's to which ESC. So here's a little trick that I do, is I just take my foam tack glue and put a little bit of foam tack on there, and I will just glue that right to the side. Now the trick with this foam tack is get it put in place, get contact with both sides, and then you want to take and pull it off, stick it, pull it off, and you'll start seeing like a spider web looking, and that's the glue starting to activate. And you just hold it off away from there for just a second. Once you get a nice spider web going, let the air activate that glue, and then you get like this instant tack, and so it'll stay in place for you without any problems and allow you to work with it without getting glue all over. So we'll do that to both of those switches, and then we'll be ready to hook the motors up. And now we don't want to forget to hook up our ESCs to our receiver, and just any one of them. One goes to channel 9, one goes to channel 10, and 50-50 chance you'll get it right. But that's easy to just take and swap those two wires if you don't get them on the right channel. But we'll get those on there and ready, and then we'll be ready to plug in our motors to the ESCs. And on these, you notice there's the motor wires. I've got 3 red, 3 black on the heat shrink. So the 3 reds are one motor and the 3 blacks are the other motor. So you just want to make sure that each of those goes in any orientation on that ESC. That can be swapped also. And if you look, there's a boo-boo. I plugged in a black wire to one with the reds, and I did catch that and swapped it out in my check, and so we got that swapped over and fixed. Get everything hooked up, our radio, get our battery plugged in, and then we'll give this a test run here. I'm just gonna put a little tape on these connectors, one to hold them in place since I'm going to be jamming that wiring around, packing it in, as well as you always have a little bit of exposure right there at the joint, and so I want to close all that up to prevent any possible shorting on anything, whether it be the frame or on the other wires, just to try to prevent some problems in the future. So get those all taped up, and then we'll be ready to start stuffing this thing like a turkey. And I'm going to clean out some of the debris from drilling, get all the metal shards out of there. I don't like metal mixed with my electrical, so clean up all those shavings, clean up a little bit of that oil in there, get rid of that, and then our little cavity right in there. We'll be ready to receive those little electronic giblets. is my plug for the battery? Dadgum, I stuffed it in there too. There it is. We don't need everything stuffed in there. Wow, I think that's it. Now we can get our cover put back on. We're done on the inside of this thing. Get our plug for our lights plugged back in. I'm so glad I did that connector. Get that on there. And then we'll get our screws all put in place. Make sure our receiver's snug, no pinched wires. And we'll put our 4 screws in. I just wanted to show you guys how those gears are. It looks like it's got cogs in it that hold it to the planetary gear system. So I don't think it's going to be any kind of an issue. That's definitely not any looser than the stock ones were. So it'll work out fine, I think. I just wanted to, it kind of caught me off guard when I opened the package and seeing how those were, but after looking at it, I was still happy with it. So we'll get these tracks put back on, get them in place, and that should be the last step. We'll be ready to test run. And here's our first little test on some nice concrete. Of course, the other ones worked fine on concrete too. Nice, smooth surface. You don't have anything really putting a lot of resistance on your tracks. So once we get this thing outdoors, that's when we'll really get a test to see how well these hold up. Loading it on the trailer, unloading it, all the things that put extra stress on the motor and the components. We're going to see what happens. But here's the first little drive test. Wow, I think this thing is twice as fast as what it is stock with this brushless upgrade. That is fantastic. That was one of my biggest complaints, is the thing was so dadgum slow on the tracks. It just, you couldn't transition from point A to point B. It just took forever. So that's nice. It's not super fast, but it's a lot faster than it was stock. I wouldn't even have minded the slow speed of the stock ones if they would have just been strong and held up, but Mine just didn't, and so that's why I upgraded. These are planetary gear systems, so they should be a lot stronger and a lot better. I do have problems with planetary gear systems as well, so we'll see how these hold up to the strain of working.